The quiet exit. You can always tell they got Grandma's side of the nose, Claire said, her voice bright and arch, the kind of polished cruelty that passed for wit in rooms like this. A ripple of laughter moved around the table, shallow and conditioned. Gordon didn't laugh. He looked down at his wine glass, the Cabernet wavering slightly with the tremor in his hand. Across the table, Margaret smiled, not at him, but at Claire, a tight, well-practiced smile that never reached her eyes. Howard, half deaf and half attentive, chuckled without asking what the joke was. Nathan leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had never been the butt of one. The children had already been ushered into the den with dessert and a film. Gordon had offered to help, but Margaret had deflected him with that smile, the one she used at galas and memorial services. Serene, antiseptic, final. So, he had returned to his seat beside Howard, who had taken to narrating his own chewing in recent years. Claire was still speaking, something about ballet school and how the twins had her arches but Nathan's coordination. But the sound thinned in Gordon's ears. He kept his gaze on the rim of the glass. The tablecloth was cream damask. Margaret had insisted on it, even though they'd only be 8 for dinner, 10 if you counted the children, which she did not. The fire crackled behind him. It was always lit, regardless of the weather. Tradition, Margaret said. The room smelled faintly of lemon oil and old upholstery. Gordon stood quietly when the coffee came, excused himself with a nod that no one acknowledged, and walked out into the kitchen. The silence hit him first, deep and unceremonious. No music, no chatter. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock over the pantry door. He rinsed his hands at the sink, dried them slowly, then opened the drawer beside the range. The silver polish was still there. Wright's, the same tin he'd used for years. And beside it, the lint-free cloth folded with surgical precision. He didn't need it tonight. His cufflinks gleamed already, small ovals of onyx and white gold, a gift from Howard in a better decade. He closed the drawer and, instead of returning to the dining room, turned down the hallway toward the study. The door creaked open on a room he knew by heart. The leather club chair, the frame prints of the Thames, the antique desk with its brass-handled drawers. He didn't turn on the light. The firelight from the dining room cast just enough of a glow to see the outlines. He moved to the desk, opened the center drawer with the usual resistance. It always caught on the left side, and felt for the key tucked inside the back panel. Not the bank key, the other one. The one Margaret used for her private files. It was there. He crossed to the small walnut cabinet beneath the bookcase and inserted the key. The lock clicked open with a sound that felt louder than it should have. The folder was labeled Claire Hospital Records. Nothing unusual in that on its face. Claire had been in and out of clinics during her second pregnancy. Migraines, blood pressure, something Margaret had mentioned in passing. Still, the folder wasn't in the general file cabinet. It had been locked away. He sat down in the desk chair and flipped it open. Inside were standard hospital printouts, admission forms, discharge summaries, a few faded ultrasound images. But then, near the back, a single page stood out. A lab referral, half redacted with a thick black line. Not professionally done, not even with care. A Stettler marker, probably. The kind Margaret kept in the kitchen drawer beside the wine keys. But it wasn't the redaction that stopped him. It was the underline. A jagged, impatient line beneath a few unredacted words. Genetic assessment, drawn with a hand he knew better than his own. Margaret's handwriting was surgical when she wanted it to be. But when she was angry, rushed, or careless, it splintered. This line had been made in a single stroke, hard enough to indent the paper beneath. He flipped the page over. Nothing on the back. He went back through the folder. No test results, no doctor's notes explaining the referral. Just that page, buried near the back, as if someone had meant to remove it and then change their mind. He stared at it for a long time. The room had gone colder. Or maybe he had. From the hallway, he could hear the clink of cups and the low murmur of voices. Margaret's efficient tones, Claire's laugh, Nathan's easy baritone. Howard was likely dozing off in his chair, a napkin still tucked into his collar. Gordon slipped the page into the inside pocket of his jacket and closed the folder. He returned it to the cabinet, locked it, and replaced the key in the desk. He stood for a moment, then walked to the window. The lake shimmered beyond the glass, windless and dark. Their boathouse light blinked lazily on the far shore. Somewhere behind the trees, an owl called once and fell silent. He reached into his jacket again, felt the page, stiff, folded once, and pressed it flat against his chest. He didn't feel rage, not yet. What he felt was something harder to name, a shift, as if the floor beneath the house had tilted a fraction, just enough that things once settled began to slide. He knew what Margaret would say, that it was nothing, that it had been precautionary, that Claire had been anxious and the doctor had overreacted, that the referral didn't mean what he thought it did, but she hadn't told him, and Margaret always told him, even when she didn't want to, especially then, because she liked to be the one who revealed things, in her own terms, with her own spin. This had been hidden. He turned from the window and straightened his cuffs. The onyx gleamed in the firelight. Back in the dining room, Claire's voice rose again, cheerful and bright. I swear, if they inherit my thighs and Nathan's appetite, we're going to have to padlock the pantry. More laughter. Gordon walked slowly down the hall, past the kitchen, and out onto the back terrace. The night air was sharp, and the stone beneath his shoes felt slick with dew. He sat on the bench beneath the arbor and looked out at the lake. Something had cracked, not loudly, not visibly, but with the quiet finality of a hairline fracture in glass. Unnoticed at first, but fatal in time. The morning after, Gordon rose before the others. He moved through the house with the quiet economy of someone long accustomed to being awake while others slept. The kettle clicked on, and he waited without impatience, watching the steam curl against the kitchen window. The lake beyond was still a mirror, pale and cold under the early light. He took his tea into the study. The door closed with its usual soft thud, sealing him into the room that was most his, though it held little that was personal. A leather blotter, a few framed certificates, the walnut box with his cufflinks. The desk lamp cast a narrow cone of light, and in it he laid out the page he'd taken. The referral was redacted, but not well. A name had been obscured with a marker, but the pressure of Margaret's hand had scored the paper. He tilted it under the light, tracing the indentations. The surname began with a B, maybe 2 syllables. There was a date, 6 years back, and a line that read, "Recommended for further paternity investigation." That was the phrase that clung. He had never been sentimental about the children, but he had never been cruel. Claire had been a difficult teenager, and Margaret had insisted they keep the peace by accommodating her unpredictability. Gordon had obliged, quietly stepping aside when his presence disrupted the fragile family choreography. He hadn't questioned the timing of Claire's first pregnancy or the sudden financial assistance she'd needed then. Margaret had handled it, as she handled most things. Now, he opened the drawer where he kept the family trust documents. Not the final copies, but annotated versions with sticky notes and margin scribbles from years of revisions. He flipped through to the section on beneficiary qualifications. Lineal descendants of Helen C. Price, it read. Not adopted, not step, bloodline. He murmured the words aloud, just once, to hear them outside his head. Lineal descendants. The trust was vast. Quietly managed by Berman and a small team, it provided for education, property maintenance, health costs, and discretionary distributions. Claire's children were listed as contingent beneficiaries. If they were not, the assets would be reallocated, not vanished, but redirected. Gordon had discretion, as co-trustee, to enforce those clauses. It had been a dry legal point until now. He closed the folder and locked it again. Later that week, he arranged to stop by Howard's flat under the pretext of checking on the heating. Howard had always been particular about routines. The Sunday roast, the Times crossword, the comb laid out on the dressing table beside his watch. The flat smelled of old tobacco and furniture polish. Howard was napping in his armchair, a tartan blanket over his knees. Gordon moved quietly through the bedroom, noting the framed college photo on the dresser, the military commendation, the row of cufflinks in their tray. The comb sat as expected, a curved tortoiseshell Kent with several strands of white hair caught in the teeth. Gordon picked it up, wrapped it in a fresh tissue from the box beside the bed, and placed both in an envelope from his coat pocket. He returned the comb precisely as it had been. Back in the living room, Howard stirred. "Gordon, that you?" "Yes, just checking the thermostat. Margaret said it felt off." "Bloody thing. either a sauna or the Arctic. Gordon smiled politely. I've adjusted it. Should settle by tonight. Howard grunted. Stay for tea? Can't today, I'm afraid. Claire's invited us for brunch. Howard waved him off. Give her my best. Gordon nodded and left, envelope secure in his coat. Claire's house was a white brick colonial with wide windows and a manicured lawn. The sort of place that seemed always ready for a magazine shoot. She greeted him in a cashmere jumper and pearls, her smile bright and practiced. Come in, come in. They're just finishing pancakes. Nathan's trying to teach them to flip. Gordon smiled, dutiful. Sounds perilous. The children squealed from the kitchen. He followed the sound, taking in the curated mess. Syrup in a porcelain jug, linen napkins slightly askew, a vase of tulips already shedding petals. He made small talk, asked about school, admired a finger painting thrust under his nose with sticky fingers. Claire handed him coffee in a bone china mug and turned back to the sink. The youngest, a boy of 4, wandered off with a juice cup trailing behind him. When he dropped it on the floor, Gordon bent to retrieve it. The lid had popped loose and a thin film of apple juice clung to the spout. He wrapped the cup in a paper towel from the counter, feigning a spill, and slipped it into his coat pocket when Claire turned to scold the boy for running indoors. You're good with them, she said, not looking at him. Children respond to quiet, he replied. She laughed. Not these ones. They respond to bribes and cartoons. He stayed another 15 minutes, excused himself with a vague promise to return soon, and drove back into town. The lab was in a nondescript building off a side street. No signage beyond the address. He parked 2 blocks away and walked. Inside, the waiting room was empty. The receptionist, a man in his 60s with a clipped mustache and no name badge, looked up from a crossword. I have a referral, Gordon said. Private testing, cash. The man nodded. Do you have the samples? Gordon handed over the envelope and paper towel. Unlabeled. I'll need them coded. The man opened a drawer and pulled out 2 vials and a printed form. Alias, James Hargrove. Date of birth, 1951, April 2nd. Results in 10 days. We'll call this number when they're ready. You'll need to return in person with ID matching the alias. Gordon nodded. Understood. He paid in cash. Crisp notes, counted once, no receipt. The man tucked the vials into a drawer and returned to his crossword without further comment. That night, back in the study, Gordon sat with the ledger open. He wasn't writing, only tracing the columns with his finger. Names, dates, amounts. He paused over Claire's entries, the tuition disbursement, the down payment on their house, the pediatric fund, all within the trust's discretionary scope, all predicated on an assumption, lineal descendant. The words echoed again. He opened a fresh page in his notebook and began to sketch a timeline. Claire's first pregnancy, the referral date, Margaret's hospital visits, the shift in how Margaret spoke of the children, never our grandchildren, always Claire's lot. Subtle, but marked. He paused. The cufflink box sat closed on the desk. He opened it, selected the onyx pair, and began polishing them with a soft cloth. It was not yet rage, but it was something colder, a settling of accounts. The lake outside was black in the window pane, a perfect void. He didn't look up from the cufflinks. The reservation was made under Margaret's name, as always. Levex didn't need prompting. The maitre d' recognized the call and confirmed the private room with a warmth that bordered on reverence. Of course, Mr. Price. The Westmore room is yours. Shall I note the occasion as your anniversary again? Yes, Gordon replied, pen poised over his desk blotter. Same menu as last year, the lemon tart at the end. Naturally. He hung up without smiling. The ritual was part of the trap. Back in the study, the envelope lay precisely centered on the green leather mat. Norton and Ashby letterhead, heavyweight cream paper, his trusty authority typed in clean serif. The signature line was already filled, his own name, with the slow, deliberate signature he'd practiced for decades. Not rushed, not shaking, just final. He folded the letter, slid it into the matching envelope, and tucked it into the inner pouch of the key case. The brass key, the safety deposit box, clicked softly as he closed the clasp. He ran his thumb once over the leather, then again. A private benediction. In the drawer beside him, the lab's instruction sheet remained untouched. He'd memorized every line. chain of custody, alias ID, 10 business days. But the silence of the house made it easier to hear the echo of Margaret's voice, the clipped way she had once said, "No, Claire's children won't attend that school, not with their background." He had been standing beside her at the club's spring gala, holding a glass of seltzer when she said it. Claire had been across the room, radiant in red, laughing with the chairman of the board. Nathan had just secured the silent auction item, a frame lithograph of the marina, and Margaret had nodded approvingly. The family image, curated. But her voice, low and precise, had cut through the music and the tinkle of glasses. Their background. He hadn't understood it fully then, but now the phrasing lodged like a shard. He rose, walked to the cabinet, and unlocked the lower drawer. Inside was a leather folder, the kind given to board members and trustees at foundation meetings. He opened it. The lab report would go here. The original, not a copy. The notarized trustee directive would sit on top, the seal visible. The order of presentation mattered. He closed the folder and placed it on the side table. Then he sat back down and began drafting a second letter, this one to Arthur Berman. It would not be sent until the night of the dinner, but the outline needed to be precise. He wrote in longhand, "Arthur, please be present at Levesque's Westmore room at 8:30. I will signal with the leather folder. You'll have the sealed directive in hand. Proceed with certification and immediate service to all primary beneficiaries. Freeze disbursements. Reallocate per enclosed instructions, effective immediately." He paused, tapped the pen once against the paper, then added, "They will attempt to contest. Do not delay." He signed it, folded it, and placed it in an envelope marked simply, Berman. That evening, he attended the club's committee reception. A quiet presence at the back of the room. Margaret made the rounds in navy silk, pearls resting just above the collarbone. Claire was there too, in a pale blue sheath and heels that clicked across the parquet with purpose. They greeted donors, sipped wine, and nodded through compliments about the Foundation's latest literacy initiative. When someone praised the Price family's legacy of giving, Margaret smiled graciously and replied, "We've always felt stewardship was a duty, not a preference. It's our money, but it must serve more than just us." Gordon heard the emphasis. Our money, not his, not even Howard's by implication. Ours, as in hers and Claire's. The performance was practiced, even elegant, but it was a lie. He left early, unnoticed, and drove home in silence. The house was dark. Margaret would stay late as she often did. Claire and Nathan would be seen leaving together, probably with one last round of farewells. It was the kind of evening that soothed them, performative, self-assured, unchallenged. In the kitchen, Gordon made tea, the same mug, the same steeping time. He sat at the table and unfolded the timeline again. He marked a new note, March Gala, Margaret, our money, then underlined it twice. The pattern was no longer subtle, it was structural. Later, in the bedroom, he opened the armoire and selected the suit for the dinner. Charcoal, single-breasted, the one she had always said made him look appropriately distinguished. He pressed the cuffs gently, then laid it on the valet stand. The onyx cufflinks were already polished. He stared at the suit a moment longer than necessary, then turned out the light. The following morning, Arthur Berman arrived precisely at 10. Gordon met him in the study, handed him the sealed envelope marked Berman, and said only, "You'll be at Levesque's?" Arthur nodded. "I'll wait in the lounge. I'll know when to come in. Make sure the directive is served before anyone leaves the room." "It will be." Arthur hesitated. "You understand, once this is done, it will not be undone. There's no way to walk it back. Not legally, not personally." Gordon met his gaze. "There's nothing to walk back to." Arthur left without further comment. At the bank that afternoon, Gordon entered the private vault room and placed the leather folder into the safety deposit box. He lingered a moment, staring down at the folder resting atop old papers and a pair of Margaret's mother's brooches she had asked him to store years ago. He locked the box, returned the key to his pocket, and walked out into the cold sunlight. He did not go home. Instead, he drove to the marina, sat in his usual spot near the edge where the dock met the gravel path, and watched the water move. The benches were empty. A gull passed overhead. He thought of Claire's first pregnancy, the way Margaret had managed the baby shower, called it a quiet gathering instead of a celebration. He remembered the hospital visit, where Margaret had arrived late and left early, citing a board call. He remembered how she had never once held the child. All those moments, dismissed then, now slotted into place with brutal clarity. Back home, the house was still. He opened the study door again and stood, just watching the room. The leather folder was no longer on the side table. It was locked away. The envelope for Berman was gone. The suit was pressed, the reservation made. All that remained was time. And the silence. The next morning began with the usual rituals. Gordon stood at the kitchen counter, pouring water into the stovetop kettle, folding the tea towel across the handle just so. Outside, frost clung to the corners of the garden windows, catching the pale light. The silence in the house was complete, but not unfamiliar. He measured the Earl Grey leaves into the pot, set out a single cup and saucer. The second cup stayed in the cabinet. Margaret entered precisely 8 minutes later, as she often did, dressed in a navy wool sheath and a soft silk scarf looped at the throat. Her heels made no sound on the tile floor. She nodded once toward the kettle. "I have the museum meeting at 11, she said, without looking up from her phone. "Claire might stop by later. Something about the gala seating." Gordon stirred the tea gently, watching the leaves swirl. "I'll be out for a few hours. Arthur and I are reviewing the fiscal year reports." She hummed, scrolling. "Remind him that we still haven't received the revised disbursement schedule from the foundation. The board will ask." He handed her the cup. She took it without thanks, sipped once, then set it down. "The garden's looking tired," she added. "We should have the landscapers in before the frost really sets in." "I'll call them," Gordon said. She left the room without another word. Later, at the club, Gordon moved through the lobby with practiced ease, nodding to the concierge, declining the offer of the paper. The bar was half full retired colonels and investment men nursing lunchtime scotches. Claire spotted him before he saw her, rising from a table near the windows. "Uncle Gordon," she called, with that bright social tone she used when others might be listening. She kissed his cheek lightly. "I was hoping to catch you." He gestured to the chair opposite. "You found the sunny table." "Always." She laughed and adjusted her sunglasses on top of her head. "I just had lunch with the Tilsons. They're trying to poach the headliner for our gala. Can you believe that?" Gordon smiled faintly. "Poaching is a kind of flattery." Claire leaned forward, dropping her voice. "Between us, I think Margaret's losing her grip a little. She's been off, not sharp. You've noticed it, haven't you?" He folded his hands in his lap. "Margaret's always precise." Claire rolled her eyes. "That's one word for it. Anyway, this is delicate. I wanted to ask if the trust might be able to underwrite the additional lighting package. It's only a small bump, but it would let us use that new projection artist. Very buzzworthy." "I'll mention it to Arthur," Gordon said evenly. Claire beamed. "You're the best." He stood. "Give my regards to Nathan." She waved him off, already tapping at her phone again. Arthur Berman's office was 2 floors above a tailor's shop on Pembroke. The waiting room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. Gordon let himself in without announcement. The receptionist, a young man with severe hair and a neat lapel pin, nodded him through. Arthur stood at the long sideboard, aligning papers into a folder. "It's ready," he said without turning. Gordon closed the door behind him. "And the certified notice?" "In the envelope, dated but undelivered." Arthur handed him the folder. "Your signature will activate it." Gordon opened the folder. His name was printed at the bottom of the trustee directive, the language formal but familiar. He had written the first draft himself, weeks earlier, then handed it to Arthur for refinement. It invoked discretionary clause 9.2 of the Helen C. Price Family Trust, allowing for immediate suspension of disbursements to non-lineal descendants pending reassessment of eligibility. The language was cold, intentional. Arthur sat. "You understand what happens next?" Gordon nodded. "They will challenge it. Margaret will claim undue influence. Claire will cry. Nathan will vanish. Howard will find a barrister who still owes him something from Cambridge. I know." Arthur steepled his fingers. "And you'll be blamed. Quietly, but completely. They'll say you overreached, that you always resented the attention Claire got, that this is about legacy, not legality." Gordon said nothing. "You'll lose access to the house, the lake property, the memberships, possibly some friends. This isn't just a document, Gordon. It's a floodgate. I'm aware." Arthur looked at him for a long moment. "Then sign it." Gordon took the pen. His hand did not shake. He signed twice, once on the directive, once on the instruction to serve notice. Then he closed the folder and passed it back. Arthur slid the folder into the leather case. "I'll be at Levesque's tomorrow, as agreed, in the lounge at 7 sharp. Make sure the staff sees you." "They will." Gordon stood. "And the foundation documents?" "Filed. The Helen C. Price Foundation is now the sole discretionary recipient of all suspended funds, pending reassessment. You'll chair the board." Gordon nodded once. "Thank you." Arthur rose but did not extend a hand. "You're certain?" "There's nothing left to be uncertain about." Outside, the late afternoon light had begun to fade. The shop window below glowed amber, a mannequin in a charcoal suit staring out onto the quiet street. Gordon turned his collar up against the chill and walked slowly toward the car park, the weight in his coat pocket, the safety deposit key pressed against his thigh like a seal. At home, Margaret was in the sitting room, rearranging a bowl of dried lavender. She looked up as he entered, but only briefly. "Claire says she might bring the children by next weekend," she said. "They're asking about the lake house again." Gordon unbuttoned his coat. "It's not the season for it." She shrugged. "Still, they remember the boat?" He didn't answer. In the study, he sat at the desk and opened the drawer where the cufflinks had once rested. The drawer was empty now, save for the polished wood grain and a single Statler marker left from a past annotation. He closed it gently. He thought of the lemon tart Margaret used to serve at Easter, the only dessert she ever baked herself. He hadn't tasted it in years. The evening passed in silence. Margaret read in the armchair. Gordon sat across from her, hands resting on the arms of the chair, watching the fire flicker low. The fire would burn out on its own. Tomorrow, it would all begin. The maitre d' greeted them at the entrance to Levesque's with the well-practiced warmth reserved for long-standing patrons. Margaret had chosen a navy silk dress with a brooch she hadn't worn since Claire's engagement party. Gordon noticed the effort. He offered his arm, and she took it without comment, her grip light but firm. Claire and Nathan were already seated in the private room at the rear, beyond the frosted glass partition, etched with the restaurant's crest. Howard occupied the head of the table. Kane leaned against the side, a glass of claret half drunk before the starters had arrived. "Ah, here they are," Howard said, voice dry but carrying. "Only slightly behind schedule. Must be the traffic." Margaret smiled tightly. "We parked around the corner." Claire stood and kissed her mother's cheek. "You look lovely, Mum." "Thank you, darling. You too." Margaret's eyes flicked briefly to Claire's earrings. A gift from Gordon, years ago. They no longer belonged to him, not really. Gordon nodded at Nathan, who offered a grin and a shrug that managed to be both apologetic and complicit. The waiter appeared with menus, but Margaret waved them off. "We'll have the pre-arranged set, thank you, and the 86 Puligny Montrachet." The waiter inclined his head and disappeared. Conversation drifted across familiar terrain. Howard reminiscing about a speech he gave at the rowing club's centenary. Claire recalling a disastrous charity auction where someone had bid on their own item. Nathan chuckling dutifully, his phone face down but within reach. Gordon smiled when required, laughed once at Howard's recollection of a pompous rival's wardrobe mishap, and kept his hands folded in his lap. After the first course, a chilled fennel soup with crab and creme fraiche, Gordon reached into his inside pocket and placed a navy folder on the table. The leather was smooth, unmarked, save for a single brass clasp. Margaret looked at it, then at him. "What's that?" Gordon didn't answer immediately. He waited until the plates were cleared and the wine was refreshed. The room had quieted. Even the staff outside the glass partition seemed to sense a pause. He opened the folder and turned it toward Claire. "Read it." Claire blinked. "What is this?" "Just read," Gordon said, voice low but firm. She hesitated, then drew the folder closer. Her eyes moved over the first page, then the next. Her face changed slowly, like a tide pulling back to reveal something sharp beneath. Her hand rose to her mouth. "No," she said, barely audible. "No, this can't be right." Margaret sat straighter. Claire looked up, eyes wide. "Mum, it's a lab report, DNA. It says..." She stopped, her voice cracked. "It says the children. They're not..." She couldn't finish. Her hands trembled as she pushed the folder toward Margaret, who took it with slow, deliberate fingers. Gordon watched her read. She skipped nothing. Her eyes flicked across each paragraph, each numbered line, each signature block. Then she reached the third page, a scanned referral form, redacted except for a jagged underline in a familiar hand. Her own. She went still. Howard leaned forward. "What's this nonsense?" Margaret said nothing. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Claire was crying now, soft and helpless. Nathan looked from her to the folder, then to Gordon. "What is this? What the hell is this?" Gordon answered without raising his voice. "It's a private DNA analysis, conducted with legally obtained samples, confirmed by cross-reference with Howard's DNA." Howard's eyes narrowed. "You took my DNA?" "You left your comb in the dressing room," Gordon said. "I collected one hair, no root. I had it analyzed. The results were conclusive." Margaret made a sound then, not a word, but a small, dry exhalation that might have been the beginning of a laugh or a gasp. Her eyes met Gordon's across the table. "You planned this," she said. "Yes." Nathan stood abruptly. "You can't just spring this on us. This is invasion. It's illegal." "No," Gordon said. "It's unpleasant, but not illegal. Especially not for a trustee acting in good faith to verify beneficiary eligibility." Howard's cane clattered as he pushed himself upright. "You sanctimonious little clerk. You think you can destroy this family because of some lab test? Because of a few cells?" Gordon turned to him. "You insisted for years that lineage mattered, that the trust existed to preserve the Price legacy. You made that the standard." Howard's face flushed. "That's not the same as—" "You wanted purity," Gordon said quietly. "Now you have it." Margaret rose unsteadily. Claire reached for her, but Margaret waved her off. Her hand trembled as she gripped the back of the chair. "You've humiliated us." Gordon didn't flinch. "You erased me years ago. This is just the receipt." Margaret's knees gave slightly. Claire cried out, grabbing her arm, but Margaret's body sagged before anyone could catch her. She collapsed into the chair, head lolling briefly before righting itself. Her skin had gone a sickly gray. "Call someone," Claire said. "Please, she's not well." Nathan shouted toward the door. "We need help." The maitre d' and a server appeared almost instantly, followed by a manager. One of them had already called for medics. Claire hovered beside her mother, dabbing at her face with a napkin, whispering nonsense comforts. Margaret's breathing was shallow but steady. Howard sat down heavily, muttering to himself. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. The room felt cold despite the soft lighting and the plush carpet. The wine glasses remained untouched. A soft chime sounded. Gordon pulled a slim phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. Then he looked up at Nathan. "That was Arthur Berman. The certified notices have been served. Effective immediately, all trust distributions are frozen. The Helen C. Price Foundation is now the sole discretionary recipient, pending reassessment." Nathan stared. "You can't do that." "I just did." Howard slammed a hand against the table. "You bastard." Gordon met his gaze. "You built your world on bloodlines. You passed judgment on everyone who didn't fit. You made it the measure of worth. I simply took you at your word." The medics arrived, 2 of them, young and efficient. They moved around Margaret with quiet professionalism, checking vitals, asking questions Claire tried to answer through tears. One of them glanced toward Gordon. "Did she collapse suddenly?" "Yes," Gordon said. "After reading something distressing." They nodded and continued their work. After a brief consultation, they wheeled in a chair with armrests and gently transferred Margaret onto it. She didn't protest. "We'll take her to St. Andrews for observation," one said. "Family can follow." Claire looked at Gordon through wet eyes. "You've destroyed everything." He looked at her, and for the first time in years, she saw no apology in his face. "No," he said. "I revealed it." The medics rolled Margaret out, Claire following close behind. Nathan hesitated, then grabbed his coat and went after them. Only Howard remained, slumped in his chair, breathing heavily. "Your foundation won't last," he muttered. "No one will touch you after this." Gordon stood. "Then they're welcome to try." He picked up the folder and closed it. The waiter stood in the doorway, unsure whether to clear the untouched plates. Gordon nodded once. The man moved forward, discreet and wordless. Outside the room, the restaurant resumed its rhythm. A piano played softly in the main dining hall. Glasses clinked. Laughter floated up from a distant table. Inside, the fire in the corner hearth had gone low. Gordon walked to the door and paused. Howard stared at the wall, unmoving. As Gordon stepped into the corridor, Arthur Berman stood from his seat in the lounge and fell into step beside him. "The notice was served," Arthur said. "The courier confirmed signature at the firm." "Thank you." Arthur hesitated. "They'll come at you hard." "I know." Arthur stopped at the coat check. "You'll need to vacate the lake house within 72 hours. They'll expect some gesture." "They'll get one." A valet handed Gordon his coat. The safety deposit key was still in the inside pocket. He didn't touch it. The night outside was cool and windless. Gordon walked to the far end of the car park and unlocked the door without looking back. The engine started quietly. He pulled out, left the restaurant behind, and merged into the stream of red taillights heading south. Nothing left to say. Nothing left to wait for. The morning after the dinner, a courier arrived at the Price residence with a cream-colored envelope bearing the Norton and Beckett seal. The housekeeper accepted it with a puzzled expression, as Margaret had not returned from the hospital. Claire opened it instead, standing in the kitchen barefoot, a mug of untouched tea cooling beside her. The language was precise, legal, impossible to misread. Under the authority granted to Gordon Price as co-trustee of the Helen C. Price Family Trust, all distributions were frozen effective immediately. Property access, including the lake house and club memberships registered under the trust's name, was suspended pending discretionary review. Future disbursements, it stated, would be redirected to the Helen C. Price Foundation, a charitable entity established by Gordon in accordance with Clause 16 of the trust deed. The decision was final, executed under trustee discretion, and supported by Arthur Berman as legal counsel and co-executor. Claire read it twice before setting it down. Her hands trembled, and for a moment she leaned against the counter, as if the floor had shifted beneath her. She thought of the lake house, the white linen, the summer parties, the way Nathan had once proposed they keep it in their children's names for tax efficiency. It was no longer hers. Not even the key. By the week's end, the club suspended their family privileges, pending clarification of trust beneficiary status. Margaret, released from the hospital with a prescription and a warning to avoid stress, remained in her bedroom, curtains drawn. She did not speak much. Howard had refused to visit, claiming indignantly that he had no tolerance for women who collapse when the truth arrives. Nathan, after a brief phone call with Arthur Berman that left him white-faced and silent, packed a bag and moved into a serviced apartment in the city. He told Claire he needed space, that this family drama had become untenable. Claire had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, chin high, but her voice cracked when she asked whether he would come back. He didn't answer. Margaret wrote 3 letters. The first went to Arthur Berman, invoking decades of family loyalty and demanding a review of the trustee action. She received a 2-sentence reply. Discretionary decisions executed under Clause 16 are final. Any challenge must be brought formally through the courts. The second she sent to Gordon's old office, uncertain whether he still checked the forwarding address. It was returned unopened. The third she left on his side of the wardrobe, folded neatly between 2 pressed shirts he had not taken. She did not know if he had read it. Claire tried once more. She called from her car, parked outside the club, her hair pulled back tightly, makeup fresh despite the dark crescents under her eyes. "Gordon," she said when the voicemail clicked on, "I know you think this fixes something. I know you think it's justice. But you've broken more than you'll ever know. And for what? For some twisted sense of correction? If you think this makes you noble, it doesn't. It just makes you absent. Again." She hung up before the beep. The message was never returned. Arthur Berman's office handled the property transitions with clinical efficiency. Keys were collected, locks were changed. A security firm was retained to manage access to trust properties. The Helen C. Price Foundation received its first transfer of funds 2 weeks later and quietly issued grants to 2 local literacy programs and a shelter on the east side. The press release was modest, buried in the community section of the local paper. Gordon's name did not appear. On a Thursday morning in early spring, the housekeeper entered the Price home to find a small envelope placed on the kitchen table. Inside was the safety deposit box key, a typed note on thick paper, unsigned. "There is nothing I need from here. Please redirect any mail to the Foundation's office. G." The note was left beneath the lemon tart recipe Margaret had once written in her own hand, now yellowed with age. She had made it only twice in the last decade. No one saw Gordon leave. He did not appear at the club. He did not attend the spring gala. His car was found parked in long-term storage near the coast. The key returned to the rental agency Dropbox. His name faded from committee lists, donor plaques, and the periphery of family conversations. Margaret, when asked, said only, "Gordon is taking time." Claire, if pressed, would smile without warmth and reply, "He's always liked a quiet exit." Weeks later, a man sat on a bench in Cumridge Park, facing the ocean. The gulls wheeled above, and the wind came in low and steady, carrying salt and the scent of kelp. He wore a navy jacket, the same one he had worn to the anniversary dinner, though the carnation in the lapel was gone. A paperback sat unopened beside him. His hands rested on his knees, still. Children shouted somewhere behind him. A dog barked. Far off, a freighter moved slowly across the horizon. Gordon closed his eyes for a moment. There had been a cost. He had not underestimated it. The silence that now surrounded him was not peace. It was aftermath. But it was clean. No more curated smiles. No more whispered jokes over wine glasses. No more pretense. He had not destroyed the family. He had simply stopped carrying its lie. The wind shifted slightly. He opened his eyes again, watched the sea, and let the quiet settle.